Hey there, and welcome to the Consultants Counsel podcast, a place for consulting industry guidance and best practice advisory. Whether you're working to grow in your consulting career, you're managing and developing a consulting firm, you're working with consultants, or you're just interested in business and high-performance advice, we've got recommendations and education for you. I'm Kelsey Krevling, founder and CEO of Kelsey Consulting, a firm focused on building high-performing organizations, teams, and leaders through a variety of ventures, including the Consultants Counsel. I've spent my career at the intersection of technology and management consulting, working with organizations across the country to help solve their toughest challenges, while also supporting the growth and development of multiple consulting firms, helping them improve their long-term performance trajectory. In addition, I'm an entrepreneur across a few different industries, and I serve as a startup investor and advisor, promoting the ideas of other entrepreneurs as they work to gain traction in their industries. With so many people gearing up to launch their own businesses and establish their own consulting practices, I want to make available the advice and lessons others and I have learned along the way. This podcast is made possible by Kelsey Consulting, with media support by K Studios. For more information, check out our site at theconsultantscounsel.com and KELSC.consulting. That's Kelsey.consulting. Today's episode is sponsored by 111 Jewel Design Studio, energizing spaces, products, and experiences. Based out of Texas, 111 specializes in designing, staging, and organizing residential, retail, and commercial interiors, furnishings, and events to support commerce and real estate transactions. To explore how 111 can energize your project, head to 111jewel.com. And now, stay tuned for this episode's counseling, because the consulting world is full of nuances, and the answer is always, it depends. What's possible? Do more. Hey there, I'm Kelsey Krevling with the Consultants Counsel podcast, and I am so excited for today's episode. Joining me all the way from London is Katie Rose Hester. Now, Katie has had an amazing career that has spanned multiple continents and multiple industries and areas of focus. She actually went through a major pivot from practicing as a U.S. trained litigator and attorney to working as a content marketer and now running her own successful business. Katie actually was just nominated for Digital Woman of the Year, and she is working on her first book. So check out today's episode to see how did Katie persevere through so much adversity, challenge, and hardship, and how is she building a business and future that she is excited in. Katie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelsey. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so I know it's a little bit later in the day for you, but hopefully it is a beautiful day there and you're ready to get going.
Absolutely. I would say it's a stereotypically British summer day, so it's cold and windy, but I don't mind. I don't mind at all. It's moody, and London looks good when she's moody, I think. So
Okay. And being a U.S. national, but now living as an expat in London, what took you to London?
So I had what is probably best described as a quarter-life crisis in my late 20s. I had just exited private legal practice, and I didn't know what I was going to do with myself and my life. But I had been to Edinburgh, Scotland one time before for like 2 nights on a backpacking trip, sort of like 10 years prior. And I was struggling to figure out what my direction was. And I decided all in the same week to like end my relationship, sell my house, and spend 6 months traveling in Scotland. Because I thought it would be just like a nice way to reset and figure out what I wanted to do. And I was like in the fortunate position of having a home to sell so that I had a bit of money so that I could do some traveling and not worry about working. So originally I went to Edinburgh with an Airbnb and no plans, just to literally decompress. And while I was there, I met a group of folks after I took myself to see Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, took myself on a little solo day, as one does when they're living in a like foreign city by themselves. I went to get a glass of wine afterwards, and I met this group of guys who were working filming an Avengers movie. And they were sort of like, well, we're here for a couple of months, and if you're here on your own and need some people to hang out with, like, we don't live here either, so we can explore the city together. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And then I got the flu So I was down for the count for like 10 or 11 days, and I was like, oh, they're probably not going to remember me, like blah, blah, blah. And I text the guy, this friend, Dennis, now a very good friend. And I said, hey, if you guys like still want to hang out, I am free and I'm lonely and I would like love to hang out. And I met up with the crew at a Mexican restaurant in Edinburgh called The Basement. And I met a man named Carl, who is my now husband. So he's English, and we met, we fell in love. And then 3 years later, we were married, and my career at that point had shifted into comms, etc. And so I was very mobile, and he is not, because he's in big budget film production and he needs to be in and around the studios in the UK. And so it was like, is he going to come to the US? No. So I guess I'll come to the UK. So I've been spending time in the UK off and on since 2017, when I had my quarter life crisis and like spent 6 months in Edinburgh and met a guy and fell in love. But I've lived here permanently since March of 2020, and I actually landed in Heathrow on the first day of the first national COVID lockdown. So good time.
That was a tough intro to a new country and a new way of life. I can only imagine that was extremely difficult.
It was difficult. It definitely sucks the romance out of the move to a foreign country thing, because obviously, it's very like opposite of Emily in Paris. If you're just stuck in a living room for sort of, it ended up being about 9 or 10 months that it was like full total lockdown. We couldn't do anything, go anywhere. And obviously we were newlyweds as well, and we had never lived together full time. So like just not exactly what you're looking for when you're just starting out with like your new husband or wife or partner or whatever. But yeah, we were in like total and complete lockdown for 9 or 10 months. And a rule that I think people probably don't know unless they know somebody that's on a spouse visa. But if you are on like a family supported visa, so like a spouse visa, you can't actually look for work before you get to the country. So
that's such a strange requirement. I would think that they would want new civilians living in a country to be able to find gainful employment.
Yeah, I'm not sure like what the purpose of the rule is. I'm not sure if it exists anymore. I imagine that it still does, but you can't be looking for work before you get in country. And so obviously it's hard enough if you're someone who is, moving to a new country and having to find work starting from scratch, because I suppose you could move to a country where you have like maybe a network, but I didn't. Like the only person I knew in country, I had met a couple of people in Edinburgh that I was really fortunate to have stayed in touch with, but really I knew my husband, and like that was sort of it. And I had no friends and like really no meaningful professional network to speak of. So definitely like the pandemic of it all and the lockdown and the hiring freezes. Everybody's getting laid off, right? Because companies are, suffering in the wake of COVID. And I'm out there like looking for a job and trying to convince people of my professional value when I have like no one to really vouch for me because I'm in a completely new country. So it definitely was a tricky introduction to not only like a new social environment, but also a new professional environment for sure.
Yeah, I can only imagine that would be so incredibly difficult. What steps did you take to overcome that? You're doing so well now. That's a big transition then from coming in and not knowing anyone and not having any opportunities lined up.
Yeah, so very kind of you. Okay, so there's kind of several parts to the transition. The first part was arriving, starting to apply for jobs. And obviously I had everything ready. Like I had my CV updated, I had my cover letters ready. I had identified jobs that I like thought that maybe I'd be a good fit for. I'd identified maybe groups that I wanted to join and like LinkedIn communities that I wanted to be a part of and things like that, so that I wasn't sort of touching down in a new country with no network to speak of and like no plan at all. But those things are obviously sort of like the softer elements of hunting for a job. Like it's so much easier when you can get like a word of mouth referral or when you know people. It's also just cosmically easier to find a job when you have a job. And I very much did not have a job. So the first bit of the transition was basically like blind applications and really just applying to anything and everything that I thought I might be qualified to do. At that point, I'd left legal practice. I'd spent several years kind of in this cycle of straight up unemployment, not working at all, putting rent on credit cards, trying to figure out like how the heck I was going to support myself and move forward and how I was going to redirect my career, but also doing sort of some, you don't want to call them side gigs, but like part-time work. Like my sister was able to get me a part-time gig at her company. It was sort of like a seasonal thing. I worked as a legal recruiter for about 6 months and decided that was like still too private legal practice for me. It was just not really, it was still just not the right environment. So I had periods of employment, but much longer periods of unemployment. So I wasn't just looking for a new job in a new country. I was basically trying to build a new career from virtual scratch. So the first sort of, I would say 9 or 10 months of 2021 or 2020, were literally blind applications, like just anything I could find that I thought I'd be qualified for. And I got like 2 callbacks, like one to be like a communication specialist at a bank, and I think one to be a content designer at a university. I was objectively completely unqualified for both. I mean, I have a law degree and I have some pretty good work experience, but not in these specific fields. So obviously they were flooded with applicants because everybody was jobless due to COVID, and I did not get those jobs. Like I said, I had kept in touch with some people from my time in Edinburgh previously. I was living in London, but I had kept in touch with some people from Edinburgh. And I reached out to them and I was like, I'm not even really sure what you do, but here's my skills and I'm desperate at this point. And if there is anyone that you can introduce me to, if there is anything I can do for you, for somebody that I can write, I can research, I have done this, I've done that. Like I was a corporate litigator. These are my skills. And just, I guess, like the universe thought to itself, this girl's had enough. It's been 10 months. She's been trying really hard. Let's throw her a bone. And basically I was able, one of those connections, it was sort of like the one good connection thing, introduced me to someone who introduced me to someone who introduced me to someone. And less than, I guess, 5 or 6 months later, I had gotten a job as a content writer for a digital transformation company, and worked really hard and got a promotion after a couple of months. And then I was a communication specialist, had a really nice manager, a really good team. And about a year after that, I was very happy to have the content writing role, and I was very happy to have the communication specialty role. But obviously, like those were jobs that were more junior to what I was and the skills that I actually possess. I was happy to take whatever I was given, and I really wanted to do an incredibly good job, but I knew that I was just capable, skill and experience wise of doing something more. I mean, I'd been an attorney at a relatively large law firm for 2.5 years. I had worked before I went to law school. So I knew that I could do more. I knew that I had more in me. And so I gave it a year, and then I decided to start applying for jobs with fancier titles. And I applied for a head of content role. And again, just got a bit lucky. The girl who screened me is now one of my closest friends, and we just really, really hit it off. And so she put in a great word for me, and I somehow got through the rest of the interviews, and I got that job. A couple months later, got a promotion, and then I was head of brand and content. And I stayed there for almost 2 years until the business was acquired. And in the meantime, I built Offscript in the background. And then when the layoffs came, and they did, and I was laid off, post-acquisition layoffs, it was nothing personal, just is what it is in these types of transactions. I had Offscript all ready to go, and so I launched it. So the transition took a very long time, but it was a lot of hard work, but I feel like I did get very lucky with some of the connections that I was able to make and some of the opportunities that I was able to, make happen. I feel like it was a good combination of hard work and luck.
Well, and I think that perspective of not giving up, I mean, your perseverance through that process, I can only imagine was tested constantly, and keeping yourself positive and focused on what you knew you were able to achieve. I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on what you said, where you knew you were capable of more.
Mm-hmm.
How did that really drive you towards where you are now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was enjoying the work that I was doing in the sense that I knew I could do it really well. If you want me to write a blog post or an editorial or an article, if you want me to research a topic and put together a social media strategy, or if you want me to work with people to come up with, some webinar content or all of these marketing activities that we were doing, I knew that I could do all of that because it was very like research and execution focused. There wasn't a ton of strategy behind it. There wasn't a ton of challenge behind it. And I thought, and there would have been had I been more junior. Like if I was doing that job 10 years prior, it would have been very challenging because I wouldn't have known how to craft, compelling stories. And I wouldn't have known I wouldn't have had these experience and these skills that made the job that I was doing like relatively easy for me. And I think that's what made me just hungry. I was like, okay, well, I didn't leave the field of law because I wasn't challenged. I actually loved the challenge of the work. I loved the like cerebral aspect of it. I loved the intellectual aspect of it. I didn't mind working long hours. I didn't mind the fact that every problem felt super unsolvable. Like that was actually one of the things that I loved about law school, was just sitting around and talking about impossible problems. Like, so I was always really hungry for work that I felt was genuinely challenging. And I felt like I knew that that was something that I needed at some point in the very near future in order to sustain my professional momentum and my motivation. I didn't want to lose that doing work that wasn't necessarily challenging me, that I didn't feel was expanding my skills or my point of view or making me a better marketer, which is the career that I had pivoted into. So I think that certainly resilience, and to use a word stolen from you, endurance played a massive part. But I think it was also, I think this whole aspect of I knew that I could do more was probably rooted in the fact that the only other careers I've ever had and the only other academic experiences I've ever had were just exceptionally challenging, and I was missing that. And so I thought to myself, I'm just going to start applying to jobs where I am objectively underqualified and where I'd be the underdog in the pool of applicants, because I think that's when I do my best work.
I love that. I think for anyone who is a high drive, performance based kind of person, type A, perfectionist, there is something intrinsic that just keeps you wanting more, wanting to pursue more, knowing that more is possible. And it is certainly difficult when all those efforts are not yielding the results that you would anticipate. So I'm curious, what did you do throughout this transition pivot phase to keep yourself motivated? How'd you keep yourself in good spirits and healthy and happy to keep going?
Yeah, so I was not always healthy and happy, like throughout this whole transition. It's actually probably only in the last year that I have felt as though my professional health and my personal health are aligned in a positive place. So I would say, I mean, there's a couple of buckets, right? So I've always been an athlete. I've always been pretty committed to maintaining my physical fitness, but there was definitely a period where I so during COVID, like everybody, I was like working out all the time, like most of my friends, we were like, well, we haven't had this much time in a while. Like, let's go to, let's do workouts outside or in our living room or whatever. So I definitely did that while COVID was still very much in swing. And I kept myself sane by doing these workouts and sharing these workouts and doing a lot of cooking and a lot of baking. I mean, I joined the banana bread wagon. Like, I did everything that everybody was doing, and I kept myself as sane as I possibly could. I was in a very low like mental point then, though, just because I don't really know that there was any other way to go at that point. Like, new country, no network, no friends, no family. When I'm awake, my sister's asleep. When I'm asleep, my family's awake. Like, it was just really, really difficult. And my husband had been furloughed for part of COVID, but he was actually back to work for relatively like soon after lockdown was lifted, and they just had like, social distancing measures and mask measures in place. So I was definitely at like a low mental point in 2020, but in a good physical place. Then I get my job with the digital transformation business in Edinburgh, and I'm in a good professional place, better than I had been in a while, right? Like, I've got a job that pays money. So the bar was relatively low, but like, I have a job, it pays money. I'm chipping away at debt. I'm contributing to a team. I'm talking to people my own age, and like, we're collaborating and doing all of these things. So professionally healthy, mental health probably getting a little bit better because, again, I'm in a job, it's paying me money. But then physical health fell by the wayside because it was the first time I'd been working in a while, and I poured all of my energy into that. And then I was so desperate to make friends that if they were like, oh, let's go to happy hour, let's go to dinner, let's go to this event, let's go to this show, I was like, yes, 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 yes. And I was so desperate for like social interaction that when given the choice between going for like 5-mile run or going out for drinks with my friends, I was just like going out for drinks with my friends. And then when I was working at the job in London, professionally, the healthiest I'd been. I had the best title that I'd had in a long time. I was managing a team. We were doing work that was actually moving the needle for the business. We were helping to drive a really productive commercial engine. So we were setting ourselves up for the successful exit that did eventually come via the acquisition. So professional health, tick. Mental health, I was finally making some friends. So that was like continuing on an upswing in the social aspect. But I was working like 50 and 60 hours a week, and the demands on me were very high, and the expectations on myself and my team were very high. So in that way, that was very, very challenging. Physical health, completely down the drain. I had actual friends in the city that I was living for the first time in 3 years. I was like, we are going to dance, we're going to drink, we're going to eat, we're going to go to the park. Like, there was zero. I was like, maybe made it to the gym once every 2 weeks, which is like the first time in my life that I've ever just like treated my body that way. But it was just like not, I was like, no, I am making friends at any cost. I do not care how many pounds I have to gain or how much fitness I have to lose to make these friends. That is what is happening. And so that's what I did. And then sort of towards the end of last year, I was like, whoo, we got to pump the brakes on this. And so started focusing more on my physical fitness and returning to all of those things that I do very, very deeply love: running, playing tennis, taking care of myself, cooking, and balancing that with a far more sustainable social schedule. And then obviously launching my own business. My professional health feels, better than it's ever been. So I think to answer your question, I don't really have like a tip or a trick or a piece of advice, or I don't really even have that much insight into how I took care of myself. I just know that I wasn't always doing all of it. And in retrospect, I think that was okay, because demanding of myself to be physically healthy, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, and professionally healthy when I was going through such a massive transition, I'm not sure that would have been possible. And I think by leaning into different bits of it at different times when it made sense, I was probably able to actually stay a bit saner than I otherwise would have had I felt as though I were failing for not ticking all of the boxes all at the same time.
I think that's actually very apt and very accurate, because any time in my life I have tried to succeed on all fronts, it is overwhelming and sustainable. There has to be a give and take somewhere where, okay, I'm being really healthy and mindful, but then I need some lagniappe where I can actually have a little bit more sleep, or I am really working hard on a professional level, but I need a little bit of a treat and I need to be able to eat a little bit less diligently and
Yeah.
strenuously, because for some reason I struggle with all of it all at the same time. So I think probably giving yourself that kindness and grace served you well
Yeah.
during such a challenging transition. Okay, so you mentioned, I mean, you've started Offscript, you've launched a business in another country. What has that actually been like? The process,
Mm,
the paperwork. I have
mhm.
to imagine that there's a number of hurdles that are different than what we experience in the States.
Yeah. Well, to just go back to the last question, just super quickly, giving myself that kindness. I don't know that I thought that that's what I was doing while I was doing it. I think I was in sort of a survival mode. I think that what I was doing was focusing on, without being intentional about it. I think I was just focusing on the areas that I felt like A, I could control, and B, were giving me like the biggest ROI. Like I the first thing that I really wanted to do was get a job. So then in that first job, I was like, okay, I feel good. So like my professional health is good. But then eventually I was like, well, yeah, I'm like succeeding professionally, but I'm really, really lonely, right? So then I started leaning into the social stuff, and then other stuff falls by the wayside. So I think that whatever part of your brain like tells you what you need without you like being aware of the fact that it's telling you what you need was like in overdrive at that time. So I can't take credit for leaning into things and giving myself kindness. I think it was purely the product of being in survival mode, and so I think that's how that worked. But as far as building Offscript in a different country, I I'm lucky in the sense that I'm not a total stranger to incorporating businesses, paperwork. I was a lawyer for several years. I still have a lot of friends that are attorneys. So if I am ever like just totally lost at sea in a contract or something like that, I have a million people that I can call. Um, Starting the business was not hard. Starting the business was like a couple of pieces of paperwork on a really easy to use government website. It's a nominal fee. One of the first things I did was get an accountant, because I'm not trying to get deported. Like, so I want the money to go where the money's supposed to go. So like that's not going to be the reason that I get kicked out of this country. So I hired an accountant, and Kirsty and Emily, shout out to them. They're amazing. Just wonderful women who I would be completely lost without, especially now that Offscript is my sole source of income. When it was like a side hustle, it was much easier. But now that it's, my sole source of income and it's my business, definitely rely on them a lot. What I will say though is, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people, is that setting up a business in a new country is not hard. Getting a visa is outrageous. So I am a former lawyer. I have a lot of lawyer friends. I was in the financial position and by financial position, I mean I had a credit card with a bit of money left on it that I hadn't maxed out yet. So I was able to hire an immigration attorney when I first moved here. It was about as close to impossible as you can get without just stopping. I've talked to a lot of people about this because I feel really strongly about this issue. If I, as an educated corporate litigator with an immigration attorney who is a top-notch attorney in her space, can barely navigate the immigration process to the UK. I am a native English speaker. I am a native English reader. I didn't have any issue with translating or interpretation of the documents. I was able to follow the instructions. But there's things like, for example, I was living in Chicago before I came to the UK. I had to go to like this visa center that was in the middle of absolutely nowhere outside of Chicago. If I hadn't had a car, well, I didn't have a car, but like I was able to get an Uber. But if I didn't have the funds to get to the center to get my fingerprints taken, like that's falling at the first hurdle. And I feel so strongly that the process is so outrageously overcomplicated. If I almost wasn't able to do it. I mean, it cost me, well, in terms of literal dollars, I mean, it was, when it was all said and done, if I don't include shipping my stuff across the Atlantic, because that's not something that everybody does when they move. So if I take out that variable cost, the immigration attorney, the paperwork, the trips to and from the visa center, the fingerprints, the biometric residence permit, making copies of every lease, every job contract, basically every piece of paper that could in any way contextualize my background, making a million copies of those. I mean, the packet that you send in to Customs and Immigration is like this. Proving my husband and I had a genuine relationship, getting letters of reference from everybody that I have ever met and their mothers and their mothers' cousins. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing what you need to do to immigrate legally. With all of that, and that doesn't, like, this, you can't quantify the effort it took. All I can do is add up the dollars and cents without the shipping of my goods to the UK, but including the cost of tickets, plane tickets, to do the fiance visa, the marriage visitor visa, and the spouse visa was over $10,000. Was and barely I was barely able to use like my knowledge and skill to do it, and money and like resources. Like, it was outrageously difficult. So setting up a business, easy peasy, but moving to a new place, even as like an educated, middle class, native English speaking person, was borderline impossible. And I feel very strongly that it shouldn't be.
That's actually how I feel about the US healthcare industry. I spent my career working in healthcare and healthcare software, helping organizations with their revenue cycle system implementation. So I understand the invoices and the billing and the charges and how all of it functions. And yet, if I get a bill from a healthcare system, even I find it just horribly
Impossible.
overwhelming and difficult to navigate. And
Yeah.
that's with all my background and experience. And it's like, that's not fair. There's something broken there if that's what you're experiencing. So that's really interesting that once you're there, it's easy to set up a business, but actually getting there is the hurdle.
Oh, and every 18 months or 15 months or 18 months, whatever it is, I have to renew my visa. So I have to basically go through that whole process. It's not an abridged process. It's that process again every 18 months. And it costs another 5-10 grand. So,
Wow.
I mean, the application fee is whatever it is, but, you know, if you're in the position to hire an immigration attorney, you do, and they're just not cheap.
No. Well, and that also, I think, speaks to what we're seeing in other countries where they're wanting the talent to come to them.
Right.
And as a result, they're making the processes a lot easier in order to be attractive for people who want to immigrate elsewhere.
Yeah. So, having Offscript, easy. Yeah, easy. I just file a few declarations every year and off she goes.
Okay. So tell us more about Offscript. What is it currently doing and what plans do you have for it in the future?
Yeah, so Offscript currently offers brand and content strategy. So I work with primarily, but not exclusively, but primarily product-led businesses in their startup and scaling phase of growth. So I'm mostly working with businesses that are a couple of years old. They're starting up, not necessarily bootstrapped. Most of them are pretty well funded. Or businesses that are ready for sort of like that next level of growth. So maybe they're looking to shift a market, lead a category, define a new category, amplify their offering in some kind of a way. And I work with them on two primary bases. So the first being content strategy and production, pretty straightforward. Try to help them develop a comprehensive content strategy for the marketing side of their business. A lot of these businesses don't have super developed marketing functions, not super sophisticated marketing functions. It's like a one or a two-man show in a lot of these businesses, or completely outsourced, like just to someone like myself, like a consultant. And in that case, I'm just producing content for them and helping them with their content strategy. So that might look like coming up with, content clusters, and it's a bit technical, but content clusters, trying to help them decide what to write about. What do they want to say? How do they want to tell their story? What category do they want to operate within from a content perspective? And then helping them deliver that content. So whether that's on their own channels or third-party channels, earned media, paid media, we do all that kind of thing. And, it involves optimization and ranking and all of that. But I'm definitely a content strategist and producer that is far less focused on keyword stuffing and making sure that things are SEO friendly than I am on making sure that things are genuinely interesting. And a lot of the companies that I work with are, we throw the word around a lot, especially in marketing, but they are actually innovators. So they are also a lot less interested in sort of like rehashing the content that any product-led business is putting out into the world. They're usually pretty interested in coming up with some unique, like editorialized content, tackling problems from a different way. So that's the value that I offer to those clients. And then the other side of the work that Offscript offers is brand strategy. So on that side, we're working with generally the scaling businesses who already have established themselves in a market, and now they're looking to really leverage like their reputation and their brand equity to do something super, super fun and fresh. So I work with them to refine the way that they approach their competitive marketplace. I work with them to refine the way that they approach their storytelling, to refine the way that they approach their position in their category. And then we come up with a comprehensive plan to execute against that, which usually with those clients I'm working with on a longer term to roll out like a brand refresh or a category refresh or something like that. And that's working with CMOs, PR agencies, internal teams, production agencies to so these types of clients are generally working with like bigger budgets, more resources, sophisticated internal teams. These companies are usually quite big, well, bigger. And so yeah, we work on all of that. It's really fun. I have a couple of really exciting projects coming up on that side of things currently, actually. And then in terms of moving forward, she's not even a year old yet, little Miss Offscript. So I'm going to let her breathe for a bit and just do her thing. It's been really fun to, like, I literally scrawled the homepage design for the Offscript website in like a random journal, about a year ago now, because roundabout now is when I was told, listen, you're probably getting laid off. And I was like, well, let's just make this whole Offscript thing happen then. So this was when I really started brainstorming and putting together my idea of what Offscript would be, figuring out who I wanted to work with, what kind of clients I wanted to prioritize, what other arms and legs I wanted Offscript to have, like the newsletter, the podcast, all these types of things. So the fact that in less than a year, she's gone from like a scrawled, and I am not an artist, so like true chicken scratch on like a notepad, to the business that she is now. For now, I'm quite content with that. I'm looking at onboarding a couple of new clients in the fall or early next year. But my plate is currently as full as I like. And it's a really unique and fortunate position to be able to say, I just want to chill out right now and just enjoy the work that I already have. And I don't want to put myself into hyperdrive right now. But the other sort of exciting stuff that I'm hoping does come to fruition, and it's up to me. So by hoping, I just hope that I can get myself in gear and like actually do these things. But I'm writing a book, and then I've got the Offscript podcast is, my passion project. And right now, obviously, you've been a guest on the podcast, and I put out sort of one episode every like 3 to 5 weeks because that's just about the amount of time that I have. But I'd like to try to do something more with that. So I think it's less about sort of changing anything or doing anything more with Offscript. I think she's good. She's good right now. But the other passion projects, I feel really fortunate to be in a position where I could invest more in those because I'm really interested in them. So that's probably on deck for 2025.
Well, first of all, that's extremely exciting. And to go from conceptualization to actualization in such a short time frame with success, with paying clients, with demonstrated results, that is really fantastic. And
thank you.
I don't know about you, but being able to take something from the intangible into the reality and it's tangible feels so good. So kudos and congratulations.
Thank you.
You mentioned your book. I'd love to dig into what it is that you're writing about, and because I think it speaks more to your career pivot and some of the advice and recommendations that you have. So tell us about book and what your prose that you're putting down on the page.
Yes. So the book is the book. What is the book? So the book is called Lawless. And I would say that it's a working title, but I'm never changing it. So that's just the title. And I'm calling it a semi-autobiographical guide to professional rule breaking. And essentially it's in the least cringy way that it can be. It is advice and perspective for people, particularly women, who are thinking about or in the throes of, or maybe want a different perspective on their professional pivot, their career change, their transition from A to B or Z or whatever it may be. I had like my pivot was just so graceless. It was just like professional whiplash. It was awful. There's really no two ways about it. Like, things are good now, so I can look back and sort of put silver lining around some of the clouds, but it was miserable while I was going through it. It was awful. I worked very, very hard to become a lawyer. I went to law school. I did well. I ticked all these boxes and did, like, quote unquote everything right. And started to build this career that very quickly turned out to just like not be the career that was for me. It was never going to work long term for a lot of reasons. And so I was at my first law firm, and I was really miserable. There were some very decent people at this law firm, people that I still keep in touch with. One woman who was a wonderful mentor and still a friend. But by and large, the experience was horrible. It was awful. I worked for a man who just hated me. My first or second week at the law firm, and it's difficult to describe the amount of pressure that you put on yourself and that other people put on you when you're a first year associate at like a mid-size or large law firm in the US. It's really, really difficult to overstate how stressful that situation is. You have just been through 3 years of law school where you're graded on a curve and you are in constant competition with the people around you. And now those people are your colleagues and your coworkers, and you're all competing for like a relatively limited number of like good jobs that everybody kind of wants. And you're there, and it's like a race to become a senior associate and a partner, and everybody wants to get moved around to like these really big cushy firms and make loads of money. And you know what everybody's making because the pay scale is public. Like, it's just this really hyper competitive, ultra toxic professional pressure cooker. And that was all okay, except that this guy hated me. So I'll get to that in a second. But so he hated me, and my first or second week at the firm, he tried to make it casual, but he basically said, "I didn't want to hire you because I thought you looked like a party girl." And I was like, I don't know what that means. It's like, I just don't even know what that means. I don't know how to respond. I was too young to have like a really professional or I don't know, like sophisticated response to something like that. Not that it warrants one, because it doesn't, He should never have said it, but I was 26 years old and I just didn't know what to say in that situation. And I had to report to this man. I had to work for this man, and he just really went out of his way to make my life miserable. And I kind of started shopping around for other firms, but I wasn't totally convinced I was going to leave, because it's just not the done thing. Like, you just don't quit. You can get very, very easily blackballed from a legal community in a place like Philadelphia where I practice. Like, there's quite a few law firms, but it's an insular, bubbly community, and everybody knows everybody, and reputations matter. And so I'd started looking at other firms, but I wasn't convinced that I was going to leave. But this guy that I was reporting to just like ripped into me one day and was yelling at me, and another attorney, a woman, a partner, overheard. And she came to me and she said, "Do you want me to say something to HR? I'm pretty horrified." And I said no, but she did it anyway. And we can talk about sort of is that okay? Like, I'm not really sure. Like, she probably felt like she was being protective of a young female associate. I wasn't ready to make any official claims, but I ended up going through this whole process. And by the end of it, I thought, oh my God, like, I need to get out of this place. Like, I'm never going to have a career here now, right? Because he was a partner and he made a lot of money and he wasn't getting fired. Like, this HR inquiry meant absolutely nothing at the time, like nothing. And I just thought to myself, if he, has been told that the complaint arose out of an issue with me, he's just going to make it so that I like never get work in this place again. And even if he doesn't, I'm just kind of humiliated and I feel awkward. I'm young. So I eventually found another firm that did the exact type of law that I wanted to practice. So I was super, super excited. And I took a bit of a pay cut to go. And I was just like, that's okay. I'm gonna put the past behind me. I'm at this niche firm now, a boutique. It's gonna be better. The culture is gonna be better. And the culture was exponentially worse somehow. And it was really unbearable. And I thought to myself, how have I landed in a place like this again? And just like, not to put too fine a point on it, but I was one of only 2 women at the entire firm. And after I got fired for requesting 1 day off, which was a Friday, but apparently I didn't request it off correctly. I sent an email to somebody and I should have done something else. And it was like this whole big ruse just to fire me because I don't know why, but they fired me. And turns out this other woman that was working at the firm at the time like called me up and took me to coffee, and she was like, I really, really don't want you to take this personally. Like, I don't want this to be like a defining moment for how you view your self-worth as a person or an attorney, because she was like, they have a history of doing this. Like, you are not the first, you will not be the last. And she was like, the only reason that I am still here is because I've made my peace with the fact that they're never going to make me partner, and they know that. So at first I was like, well, I've dodged a bullet. Like, this is fine. And then very quickly realized that I was like never going to get another job firm in Philadelphia ever again. And so I write about that in the book. And then, as I said, I spent the next several years going between part-time employment and unemployment. And I'm here with my $250,000 law degree, with my 2.5 years of private practice under my belt, with my 4 years of education and my NCAA Division I track experience and my law review note and my bar admissions to 2 states. And I'm thinking, how am I a failure? Like, how am I a failure? Like, how is this possible? Because that's how you think about it when you're in it. And I was like, how am I a failure? Like, this is not the life that I worked so hard to set myself up for. And then obviously spent a few years here building my career, and the pandemic and the transatlantic move and the immigration. And I just, over time, I've come to realize that sometimes I personally really struggle with giving advice and offering perspective, because I just think it's a bit cringe. Like, no matter how you deliver it, you just kind of sound like you really think a lot of yourself, and it bothers me. But like, like, there's that element of like imposter syndrome, right? Like, other people see your success, you don't always see it yourself. And so, it's good to be aware of that. But I finally have gotten to a place where I've been able to successfully talk myself into believing that the story is worth sharing. And so even if it's cringe, and even if I feel like a gross imposter, I've spoken to enough people about my experience who have said that it really meant something to them to hear it, that now I believe that it means something to other people to hear it. And so that's where the book is coming from. It's not some like weird desire to like purge my story and like make sure that the world knows it. Over the course of the years, sharing my story, especially with like women that I've managed and worked with, and my friends that have been sort of like with me every step of the way, because it was rough, obviously. I've just had enough people say to me, like, this is a story worth sharing. And so now I believe it. And so now I'm sharing it.
Well, first of all, just wow for going through what you went through. That should never happen. The fact that that type of behavior is tolerated and prevalent in not just 1, but 2 firms that you experienced. I mean, it just speaks to a systemic track record that I hope is transitioning and shifting. I know that was many years ago, but how much has truly changed and what has really evolved in time. It just makes me sad that not only you had that experience, but also even when that other female asked you, hey, like, I'm going to report this to HR, it was, no, let's not make it about me, right? Like that's our first mindset. Oh, I don't want a big problem. I don't want a big deal. Now I'm going to be the, scapegoat, the kind of just out in front in an uncomfortable way. Don't draw attention to me, right? And that's so sad that that is an experience that not only you've had, but it is so prevalent in so many different industries. It's not just law, it's across the board that women have those type of experiences, and that one person can choose to have such a negative demeanor, attitude, and output that they drastically derail someone else's experiences in future. I mean, that just, it makes me mad. It makes me really angry, but it also, I think, just shows that there's so much more work to be done.
Yeah.
And that companies enable and allow it to happen. So for anyone listening to this, it's time to stand up. It's time to make a difference in the world that you live in, and in the environments and spaces that you interact in, and the people you interact with. And if you're somebody that you yourself has caused those type of challenges for somebody else, wow, it's time to take accountability for your actions. But I do agree with you. It feels cringy to have to share your own advice and experience, because, like, who am I to say what I've gone through, who's going to value that? But at the same time, I'm sure you've seen where it's been beneficial for you to hear someone else's story, and you haven't felt like that was cringe for them sharing it. If anything, you're grateful and appreciative that they're willing to speak about what they've gone through, because it paves a road for others to be able to follow. So I think it's fantastic that you are putting pen to paper, metaphorically probably, unless you're actually handwriting right now.
I'm not.
It's awesome. And I would agree with you. Do not change the title. Lawless is a great headline for a book like that. I think it's really exciting, and I think it's going to make a difference for a lot of people in a lot of different ways, but also across a lot of different industries. Because I mean, I see it all the time being touted on social media, et cetera, of people making very large either pivots or continuances in their evolution that are not what they initially anticipated. I saw a woman the other day say how, she decided early on to go for a PhD, and at 37 decided, you know what, I really was supposed to go to medical school. I'm going to go.
Good.
Or, just like complete transitions and flips of the script and what people have adopted in their own programming and in their own thought processes about who they are, and being realizing that actually it's time to change that. It's time to pursue what I am called and compelled to do. It's time to do more. So I think it's bravo to you for continuing to forge forward with a path that I am sure has not felt fun.
Not all the time, but I also think it's important, to your point, that there's more just like resources and literature, whether it be books like the one I'm writing or just like people talking about it on LinkedIn or whatever, that reinforces the idea that like the career, as anybody sort of over the age of like 30 grew up to understand it, like does not have to be the career that you pursue. Like I was very much socialized and educated to believe that a career was very much, college, like traditional university, 4-year degree, get a good job in a specific sector, and then do similar jobs, but just at like a higher pay grade for the rest of your life, and then retire when you're 60 or 65. And you had to sort of like climb the ladder, and there were like very clearly identified career milestones. Are you a people manager? Are you, at the conference table when people are making strategic decisions? Is the company that you're working at bigger than the company that you started working at? Like it was just very like formulaic and very mid-century. And I think that there's been like pretty seismic shifts in the way that people view and do careers. But interestingly, there hasn't, maybe because it's relatively recent, but it doesn't feel to me that there's been enough investigation of it. It doesn't feel to me like there's a lot of resources for people that reinforce that that's okay, that if you are not doing that, if you are not following that like very traditional professional path, that like you can still be successful. So I think part of why I feel compelled to share my story and offer advice via Lawless is that I really wish that when I was leaving law, I had easy access. I'd had easy access to a resource that would have somehow made me feel better about the fact that my career had been severed 2.5 years in. And I think that obviously you are going to have people who are 24 or 25 or 26 who wake up one day and think, what the hell am I doing? Because they committed to a path when they were 18 years old. Like the frontal lobe was still spongy. Like it's a disaster. Like it just makes no sense. So I think that ultimately, the idea that I'd like to reinforce is that the notion that any career path or professional path needs to be even remotely linear in order to be considered successful or in order to get you where you ultimately want to go is just nonsense. Like it's not even reasonable anymore. Like it's just not reasonable. Like that it's just throw it out. Just get it out of your brain, erase it, like flashy thing from whatever that movie is. Like just get Men in Black, just get rid of it, because I know people who have stepped away from managing teams in large companies to go and be individual contributors for startups and bootstraps, and they're happier than they've ever been. And some of them have even increased their earning potential by doing that. You know, there's different. So I think that's definitely like part of my motivation, is because 15 years ago when I did this, I felt like I was getting off of this track, and I felt like getting off of this track was like fatal to my professional success. And I was so worried and so stressed and so devastated about it. I was like, well, that's it. Like it's over. Like now I'm not going to have a career. I just got to hope and pray that I, find some other job that I can do that'll pay the bills. And it's like, no, that's absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. I mean, I do wish like my law degree wouldn't have been so expensive and difficult to get, but like, it's okay. It's fine that I'm not a lawyer anymore. And I genuinely believe that. Like I do not lose sleep over the fact that I'm not an attorney. It does not. I used to. I still, up until 3 or 4 years ago, people would ask what I do, and I'd say I used to be an attorney, but I'm a marketer now. Like it was still just this like part of my identity that I could not even like imagine living without, or I just couldn't shed the skin. And now people are like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a marketing consultant. And if it comes up in conversation that I used to be a lawyer, it comes up. But it took a really, really long time to be comfortable with the idea that I had like started something, stopped it, done something else, stopped it, done something else, stopped it. And if somebody can read a book or a LinkedIn post from me and be like, okay, she did all right, so like maybe I can too, then job done.
Well, and no one can take the degree away from you. No one can take
True.
the experience away from you. And so while you may not be a practicing attorney, you still have all of that knowledge, awareness, connections, and network that I'm sure is informing what you do today.
Yeah, I mean, I would never. People say, oh, I'm thinking about going to law school, or like, oh, my son or my cousin or somebody's thinking about going to law school. What do you think? And I'm like, oh, I am so not the person to ask. Like, because presumably you want to hear something positive and encouraging, and I'm not going to give that to you. But what I tell people is that being a lawyer wasn't for me, and so they should talk to somebody else, because it wasn't for me. I can only give an honest assessment of my experience, which was very poor. But I'm aware that my experience, while I do think it's probably closer to being in the middle of the bell curve than people want to admit it is probably an outlier. It's probably on the downslope of the bell curve. Like I know a lot of lawyers, and some of them have had very positive experiences, and most of them have had pretty bad experiences, but not anywhere near as bad as mine. So I tell people to go elsewhere if they want honest feedback about the career, because I didn't stay in it long enough to give somebody an assessment of like what they should do with their lives. Like that's not, I can't do that. But I do tell people that I do not regret going to law school. Not for a second. It rewired my brain in a way that has definitely like turned me into more of an overthinker than I already was, which is not ideal. But it rewired my brain in a way that I think makes me a far more effective communicator, a far more effective listener, a far more effective researcher, a far more effective critical thinker, problem solver. And I've had people that I work for who I really respect say, the way that you think about stuff is really interesting. The way that you communicate is really interesting. And I don't remember people saying that to me before I went to law school. So I do think that 3 years in law school rewired my brain in a way that like I personally am very thankful for. And also law school is just fun. You sit around and you talk about like random stuff. And I mean, it sounds so nerdy and terrible, but like if you can't sit around a table with a bunch of other smart people who are the same age as you and talk about like amendments to the Constitution of the United States, I don't want you at my dinner party. I just don't. You're not welcome because it's fun. It's so fun. Like, so I just, I'm very thankful for the experience on the whole.
All right. So if you could go back in time and change something, first of all, would you? And if so, what?
I don't think I would change events. I think that I would change some of the ways that I reacted to events. So, I think ultimately exiting legal practice was the right thing for me. So I mean, it was incredibly traumatic the way that it happened. But I think what I'm really talking about is I wish that I would have had the maturity emotionally, and the like self-assurance as just a human that I do at 38 years old when I was 28 years old. But obviously that is the benefit of time and experience and getting older. And like, to be clear, I am not super self-assured now. I'm just more self-assured than I was 10 years ago. Like I still, just like everybody, I still struggle massively with like self-confidence and self-esteem and like all of these things. And we're all works in progress, but it was even worse back then, obvious. I mean, maybe it's not obvious. Maybe some people are just really confident when they're 26 and 27, but I wasn't. And I think that my reactions to situations, much like they are today, but on a bigger scale, were just really blown out of proportion. And I wish it would be nice to go back in time and have more measured reactions to things. And it's not like I ran down the street screaming and like, it's not like I threw things at people as I was leaving the law firm with a literal cardboard box of my belongings, by the way, diplomas in a box, actually walked them the 5 blocks home to my house after I got fired. So that is a real thing that does not only happen in movies, but I just reacted in probably exactly the way that you'd expect. I withdrew. I was doing nothing but coping. Like I wasn't living, I was just coping. I was just coping. I was coping so hard. And I think that I'm still 10 years later, like emotionally recovering from that, like emotional hangover. Because it only really feels like in the last year, 18 months that I've like found my professional footing in like in a real way. And so I think that that's just like a really important thing that I don't know if people know, or maybe other people knew it and I just didn't know it. But if you experience like a professional trauma, if you go through one of these like massive career pivots after you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in 3 years and all this time and stress and energy and resource, building something, and then it just like falls apart around you in like a day, that's really traumatic. And I had really strong emotional reactions to it. I was incredibly depressed. I was really anxious. I developed like all these like obsessive, compulsive, like I was just a mess. And I'm still getting over that emotional hangover. So I guess to save the Katie of today a bit of headache, I would go back to the Katie of 2016 and say, chill. Just chill. Oh my dear God, chill. Whatever you're doing, do less of it. My God. So I wouldn't change events. I think the events have given me a lot of perspective and a lot of, perspective. But I think if I could go back in time and change the way that 20-something Katie handled it, that would probably be for everyone's benefit.
at the same time, I mean, hindsight is 2020, and
Exactly.
you're dealing with the immediacy of shocking events, and those are just by nature going to provoke really visceral responses that are
Yep.
not always, well, they're probably rational, but they're not always measured and considerate, right?
Exactly.
And so I think, going through that and giving yourself time to gain perspective and being on the other side of it where you now have some stable footing and you're feeling good, that allows you that time to kind of look back, but also it allows you the time to grieve and to process and to kind of not conceptualize, but really kind of soften the edges a little bit of the harshness that you experienced and endured. So yeah, well done, regardless of how it felt in the moment.
Yeah.
I can only imagine how incredibly difficult that was.
Yeah.
Okay, so while you don't have advice for people considering school in that way, what advice would you have for somebody right now who maybe is encountering that same type of challenge, discrimination, and kind of procession of events?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'd be able to articulate any really good advice for someone who might be like getting harassed at work or feeling as though they are being treated unfairly due to something totally out of their control. I think that the way that we respond to those things is deeply personal, but I would say that you need to try and not go through it alone. It's really hard to go through it if you have a good mentor or an ally at your place of work or in your family or your friend group. It's even harder if you don't. So one of the things that I think kept me afloat when I was struggling early in my career was having my mentor at my law firm who I was able to confide in and talk to and get perspective from. And without her, I really just would have been like totally lost at sea. Because a lot of the things that you're going through, especially if you're in sort of like one of these career bubbles, like being a lawyer is a career bubble. And of course, people who aren't lawyers can relate to your experience, but not all the way. They can get almost all the way, but they can't get all the way because it is this unique career bubble. And so, yes, you can talk to your friends and your family and your partner, and your social network about what you're going through, but it really, really helps if you can talk to someone who has lived experience in whatever space you're in. And it doesn't have to be a professional bubble, but maybe somebody that works in the same organization, somebody that's been on a similar type of team, somebody that, maybe another person who's moved to a place and started over by themselves. Like it just helps to have a sounding board where the person on the other side is actually able to like not just sympathize, but empathize, because it's not a distinction without a difference. It actually like is a massive difference. We can all listen and offer perspective. We can all listen and give our 2 cents. But if you're someone that's been through it, if you're someone that's lived through it or something similar, like the way that you approach your advice and your perspective is just different because it's informed by that lived experience. So I think that's really, really important. And then the other thing that I would say, and I tell this to people all the time, I get a lot of people reaching out to me who are either in the middle of or are considering a professional pivot. And what I always say is professional momentum is a weird animal of physics. Professional momentum is very, very difficult to start. But professional momentum is surprisingly easy to sustain. So if you are able to somehow invest in yourself as a professional, even when you're unhappy at your current job, like that's the type of thing we're talking about. If you can self-educate, take some courses online, keep applying for other gigs that you're interested in, network, meet people, all of these, it's nothing groundbreaking. Like we're not talking about activities that you've never heard of before. It's networking. It's applying for jobs. It's making sure that you still go to the gym if that's a thing you like to do. Still cook yourself dinner if that's a thing you like to do. Still make time to go see your family if that's a thing you like to do. Read a book if that's a thing you like to do. If you can keep your professional momentum going by keeping yourself sane, by making sure that you're still swimming, then I think professional momentum is uniquely easy to sustain because you're building like an ecosystem of people that are sort of like, that can't really do anything but help you as a professional. Like, like that's what you're like leaning on them for. And that's the transaction. Like that's the exchange is, well, if I meet you and you're a professional and we get along and you're in my network, then like, we're not like going out and grabbing drinks together. We're not going to the gym together. Like you're a member of my professional network. So I'll lean on you in the future and you can lean on me. Like that is the relationship. So I think building that professional momentum is really, really important. And I think that, but it's also uniquely really, really hard because if you're in a job and you're not happy, the last thing that you want to do is like leave the job that you've just worked 8 hours at and been really unhappy, maybe harassed, maybe the target of unwanted attention or whatever it may be. And then you go home and now you're supposed to what? Like apply for jobs, write a cover letter, talk about how you can add value to a different organization. Are you kidding me? You just want to bury yourself in a bottle of wine. Like you want like a cake. Like you don't want to like work on a cover letter, like fan fiction about a company that you've never heard of. Like, please.
Can we just kill cover letters? It's just, we're still having to do those.
It's ridiculous. Like, and the best way I've ever heard it described is like fan fiction about your company. Like, yeah, I'm not going to write fan fiction about your company. It's stupid. So I think that yeah, like it's just one of those things where it's so much easier said than done. But I always tell people, try not to go through it alone. I know it's really uncomfortable to be honest with people if you're struggling and you don't know exactly what their reaction's going to be, but like I find that most people are actually like really sympathetic, and if they can be, they're really empathetic. And then 2, so try not to go through it alone, and then 2, try to sustain your professional momentum vis-a-vis doing whatever you can to build your professional network, but then sub A, just keeping yourself healthy, keeping yourself sane. I think we talked about this last time that we spoke, but like you can't build fitness on a sick body, and it's really difficult to build a career if you're not taking care of yourself. Like if you're not taking care of like the stuff that you've already got in place. So I think those would be my primary pieces of advice for people going through it. Like if you're really in the thick of it, none of this matters. Just do what you can. Just survive. But if you're able to kind of poke your head above the water and think to yourself, what could I do to make this a little bit easier? Like that would be my advice.
Love that. Yeah, it very much is just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. Sometimes you have to float. Yep. Sometimes you got to roll on your back and just kind of tread water.
That's exactly it. Yeah, just do what you can.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned if people can't talk about, amendments and changes to the Constitution, you don't want them at your dinner table.
I really don't.
Who would you like to have at your ideal dinner table?
I mean, this is so lame, but like, I would just want like a massive dinner table of like just my favorite, like actual non-celebrity people. I would just want like my sister, my friends, my parents, my husband. I would want people from law, people from marketing. I would want just like people that I know and people who I respect, people who I think are smart, people who I think make interesting contributions to conversations. I wouldn't necessarily want, like, I've had this conversation with a lot of people because I used to go back and forth, but now I'm firmly in the camp of I wouldn't want celebrities. And my reason is I find, and this is just a personal thing, I find getting to know people in a group very annoying and very hard and very tedious. Like it's too much. I really enjoy getting to know people one-to-one. So if I'm having a dinner party of 2, then I will invite, like, I would resurrect like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You know what I mean? Like if it was just a one-on-one situation, I could probably list like 50 celebrities that I'd have at my table. But if we're talking about a group dinner, which I think most people are when they talk about this question, I really don't want to get to know somebody new in a group. Like there's people talking across people. You don't know what the dynamic's going to be. You have to keep your foot on the conversational gas. And like, if I'm at a dinner party, I just want to relax. So I'm just going to invite people that I respect, people that I know, people that I love, and we're just going to break bread, drink wine, and have a good night.
I love that. And I also agree with you. Making friends at a big dinner it's hard, right? And it's
so hard.
You're getting kind of clips of information, and it's overwhelming. So I think it sounds like though you're gonna be throwing a big dinner party when your book launches.
Yes, I will have like I do imagine it. So I don't know if you watched Sex and the City, but in my 20s, I did watch every single episode, like multiple times, of course. And Harry for her first book, she had like this big book launch party. And in my mind, that's how it should be. That's how it should be. So yeah, in my mind, there's a launch party.
All right, let's see it. Rooting for you for sure. So, Katie, we've been talking for over an hour now. This has just been an absolute delight and pleasure. Thank you for joining for an episode. Any final thoughts, updates, wishes you have for anyone listening today?
No, I think wishes I have for anybody listening, just knowing your audience, everybody that is listening to this episode is smart and capable, and it is well within your means, and it is well within your abilities to succeed beyond whatever you have ever thought is possible. So just a friendly reminder that it is well within your means to do whatever you want. And just a major thank you to you for creating the communities that you've created. And I'm very excited for your upcoming projects as well. So I am really looking forward to watching what you do too.
Thank you. Much, much appreciated. Well, Katie, happy Monday. I hope the rest of your day and week, months and year go really, really well.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for being a guest.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the Consultants Counsel. Thank you so much for your interest and engagement. Let us know what you'd like to learn more about by writing in to info@theconsultantscouncil.com. Thanks to Kelsey Consulting for facilitating this podcast and to K Studios for the media support. And thanks to 111 Jewel Design Studio for sponsoring this episode. To start your design project, head to 111jewel.com. And with that, cheers and all my best. Have a great week. And remember, what's possible? Do more.